Welcome to Tainted Trusts, where broken loyalty, hidden betrayal, and poisonous promises are brought into the light. Here, every story reveals the truth behind toxic relationships, family secrets, and the quiet path toward justice. Listen closely, because trust is fragile, but revenge remembers. People think relationships end because of affairs, because someone stops loving the other person, or starts loving someone else, or makes the kind of choice that requires packing a bag at 2 a.m. and not coming back. Mine ended on a Tuesday night in February, in an apartment that smelled like the dinner we'd just made together, over a question Claire had already asked me 6 months before. The question was simple. My answer was a lie so small, so unnecessary, so completely avoidable, that I've spent the time since then trying to understand what version of myself made it. Trying to find the exact moment when fear became louder than everything I actually wanted. I'm 35 years old, and the best thing that ever happened to me walked out of my life because I couldn't tell the truth about something that didn't matter. Except it did matter. That's what I've learned. Not because of what the lie was about, but because of what it meant. Because of what it told Claire about the man she was building a life with, and what it told me about the man I still, after everything, hadn't figured out how to be. This is not a story where I'm the victim. I want to be clear about that from the start. This is the story of how I lost the best thing I ever had. And why. And what it took to finally understand the difference between protecting yourself and destroying everything worth protecting. It starts the way most disasters do, with something ordinary. I met Claire Sullivan at a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning in early spring, which is not a particularly interesting or cinematic way to meet someone. But it has the advantage of being true. I was at the corner table with my laptop, 3 hours into a debugging session that had produced nothing except a cold coffee and a headache, when she came in with her work bag over one shoulder and a leash in the other hand, attached to a small, elderly beagle who walked with the slow dignity of an animal that has made its peace with the passage of time. The dog was not supposed to be in the coffee shop. The barista, to his credit, clocked it immediately and started to say something. And Claire looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has already done the risk assessment on this interaction and knows exactly how it's going to go. And she said, with a calmness that was somehow also an argument, "He's recovering from anesthesia, and I can't leave him in the car, and I'll only be 5 minutes." The barista looked at the dog. The dog looked at the barista with ancient, unimpressed eyes. 5 minutes, the barista said. Probably 4, she said. I laughed from the corner. I hadn't meant to. She glanced over, not annoyed, just registering me the way you register a sound source. And then she smiled just slightly and turned back to order her coffee. The dog's name was Biscuit. He was 11 years old, post-surgical for a benign tumor, and belonged to one of Claire's clients. She was a veterinarian at a clinic 6 blocks away. She told me this 4 minutes later when I walked over and said, in what I can only describe as the most nervous and least smooth thing I'd ever done, that I thought her strategy with the barista was genuinely impressive. She had been amused enough to explain the dog. We talked for 23 minutes. I know it was 23 because my laptop had gone to sleep, and the timestamp was there when I looked later, slightly stunned, trying to reconstruct what had just happened. She gave me her number when she left. Not because I asked, though I was trying to find the architecture of a way to ask, but because she seemed to have made a decision about it and acted on the decision, which I would later understand was very characteristic of her. I'm usually here Wednesday mornings, she said. If the number thing feels like too much pressure. It doesn't, I said. Good, she said. She left with Biscuit. I sat back down at my laptop and looked at the number in my phone and felt something I hadn't felt in a genuinely long time, the particular lightness of possibility, the specific sense that the day had just quietly changed shape. I texted her that evening. She responded in 11 minutes. We had dinner 4 days later at a Thai place near her clinic. We talked for 3 hours. She made me laugh 4 times in the first 40 minutes, not performance laughing, not social laughing, but the real kind that catches you slightly off guard. She asked good questions and listened to the answers with actual attention, which is rarer than it should be. She told me about a difficult case she'd had that week, an elderly cat whose owner was elderly herself, and had sat in the waiting room for 4 hours rather than go home, because going home without the cat felt like practicing something she wasn't ready for. I told her about the project I was debugging, She asked technical questions that were more precise than I expected. She explained that her brother was a developer, and she'd absorbed more than she'd intended to over the years. By the time we left the restaurant, it was almost 11, and neither of us had noticed. I kissed her goodnight on the sidewalk in the light rain that Seattle does in April, not dramatic rain, just the ambient moisture that comes with the territory. She had her keys in her hand already, and she tilted her face up, and it was brief and easy, and felt like something that had already been decided. "Wednesday," she said. "Wednesday," I said. I walked to my car in the rain and I thought, this is the one. I don't know how else to say it. I'd been in relationships before, 2 serious ones, a few that had the shape of seriousness without the substance. I knew what attraction felt like, and I knew what compatibility felt like, and I knew what it felt like when the two things arrived together, which is rarer than either alone. This felt different. This felt like standing in a room you've been looking for without knowing you were looking. I drove home, and I didn't turn the radio on. We'd been together for about 2 months when she asked me about Mia. Mia Reynolds was my best friend. Had been since college, 14 years at that point, the kind of friendship that accumulates its own history and language and shorthand. We'd been friends through my bad relationship in my late 20s, through her divorce at 31, through the assorted mundane crises of adult life. She was funny and sharp and occasionally maddening, and she was one of the most important people in my life. She was also someone I had slept with once. Once, a single evening, 7 years earlier, during the specific kind of night that happens between close friends when grief and wine and the particular loneliness of a Tuesday in November converge. Her mother had died 3 weeks before. I'd come over to watch movies and not leave her alone. Somewhere around midnight, we'd made a mistake we both recognized as a mistake almost immediately, and we talked about it the next morning, carefully, honestly, and agreed that it was a thing that had happened and not a thing that was going to happen again, and then we'd gone back to being friends. That was the truth. That was the whole truth. And then Claire and I were sitting on her couch 2 months in, her legs across my lap, a movie we'd already stopped paying attention to still on in the background. And she said, casually, the way she said most things, "You and Mia never hooked up, right?" She wasn't suspicious. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't a pointed question. It was the kind of thing couples ask during the early phase of learning each other's histories, the casual archaeology of, "Tell me who you were before you were mine." I looked at the television. I felt the truth sitting in my chest, completely available, ready to be said. Once, 7 years ago, it was a bad night for her, and we both knew right away it was a mistake, and we talked about it and moved on, and it's been nothing for 7 years. That was the sentence. That was the whole sentence. I opened my mouth, and I said, "No, never." Just that, 2 words, delivered in the normal voice of someone telling a truth. Then I looked back at the television like it was the most natural answer in the world, because I had become, over the course of 35 years, very practiced at making comfortable lies sound like obvious facts. Claire said, "MMM," and adjusted her position and went back to watching the movie. I sat there with the lie in the room with us, still warm, and thought, it's fine. It was nothing. 7 years ago. It'll never come up again. Why complicate something perfect with something ancient and irrelevant? I told myself this several times. I almost believed it. The 6 months that followed were the best 6 months of my adult life. That's not hyperbole. I've turned it over enough times now, trying to find the dishonesty and the nostalgia, checking it for the distortion that grief and loss can apply to memory. But no, they were genuinely the best months. The texture of them was unlike anything I'd had before. We developed the specific routines that couples develop. Her coffee order that I learned to make correctly within 2 weeks. The particular side of the bed that became mine without discussion. The shorthand that builds between 2 people who have paid close enough attention to each other. She had a habit of reading 1 more page than she intended, every single night, which meant she was always slightly sleepier than she'd planned to be. I had a habit of doing the dishes immediately after dinner, which she found baffling at first and eventually affectionate. We fought twice in that period. Real fights, not the performance of conflict but actual disagreement. Once about something I'd said about a friend of hers that came out wrong. Once about a canceled plan that had compounded into something larger about priorities. Both times we talked through it that same evening, not because we were conflict experts, but because Claire had a way of naming what was actually happening that made avoidance difficult. She'd look at me and say, "I think we need to talk about what's actually bothering me, not just the surface thing." And then she would actually say what was actually bothering her. It was extraordinary and slightly terrifying. I was trying to learn it. Mia remained present in my life the way she'd always been: texts, the occasional dinner, her birthday in November. Claire met her early on because that's what you do with your best friend's new partner. They were cordial and then gradually warm. Mia liked Claire immediately, told me so directly. "She's real, Ethan. Like actually real, don't screw this up." I told her I wouldn't. I was telling the truth when I said it. The lie sat quietly in the background of those 6 months, and I want to be honest here, almost entirely stopped thinking about it. That's the thing about a small lie in the early days of a relationship. It calcifies quickly, becomes part of the architecture. You stop seeing it as a lie and start seeing it as just the way things are. We never hooked up. It was practically true. It was true in every way that mattered. It was true in the sense that nothing had existed between us for 7 years, and nothing was going to exist. And the single night in November a long time ago had no bearing on anything. I was very good at reasoning this way. I'd had practice. Mia's 35th birthday party was in November, dinner at a restaurant in Capitol Hill. 14 people. The good kind of gathering where the table is long enough that you can have 3 or 4 different conversations running simultaneously. Claire was there. I was there. Mia was in the particular good mood that birthdays bring to people who have decided to enjoy them rather than endure them. Toward the end of the evening, the conversation had gotten to old stories. The specific pleasure of long friendships excavating their own history in public, which people who are new to the group have to navigate with good humor. Mia was telling the story of a camping trip we'd taken at 28 with 2 other college friends, which was genuinely a good story involving a collapsed tent and a bear that turned out to be a large dog. And then, casually, the way things happen casually when they're about to matter enormously, someone asked Mia how long she and I had been friends. "Since freshman year," she said. 14 years, we've been through everything together." "Everything," Claire said, with the light tone of someone playing along with the conversation's rhythm. Mia laughed. "God, yes. The bad breakups, my divorce, his terrible phase where he thought he could grow a beard." Laughter around the table. "We even had our, what do you call it?" Mia was smiling, already reaching for the next part of a different story, not reading the room, not processing what she'd started. "Our one weird night. You know how it goes with close friends sometimes. And then we sorted it out and got back to." She stopped. The room didn't stop. The room kept going, other conversations running. The person across from me saying something about the beard comment, the noise of a functioning dinner party. But Claire had gone very still beside me. I felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure. That specific quality of someone next to you choosing not to react to something, while their entire body is engaged in the process of not reacting. She picked up her wine. She took a sip. She laughed at something someone else said. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at me for the rest of the dinner. The 40-minute drive home was the quietest 40 minutes I've spent in a car with another person. Not because we were fighting. We weren't fighting. She looked out the window. I drove. The Seattle rain was doing what Seattle rain does in November, which is to say it was doing it constantly and without apology. We got inside. She put her keys on the hook. She went to the kitchen and stood with her back to me. "Claire," I said. "I know," she said. She wasn't looking at me. "Let me explain." "I know," she said again, still not turning around. Her voice was very level. I know what she was describing. I understood what she meant. It was 7 years ago, before we. "That's not," she stopped. She turned around. She looked at me with the expression of someone who is working very hard to stay on the right side of control. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Actually, honestly." "Okay. I asked you 2 months in whether you and Mia had ever, and you said no." She looked at me steadily. "Why?" The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't want to complicate things," I said. It sounded like what it was when I heard it out loud. "You didn't want to complicate things," she repeated. "It was so long ago. It was one night and it meant nothing, and we both." "I'm not asking about Mia," Claire said. "I'm asking about you, standing in front of me, deciding to lie." I didn't say anything. "You looked at me," she said. 2 months in when I trusted you because I'd chosen to trust you, and you made a decision. You decided that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me, which is..." She stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. That is not your decision to make, Ethan. What I can handle, what I need to know, what I get to factor into whether I'm building something with someone. I know, I said. You stole my choice. Those 3 words. She said them quietly. Not dramatically. Claire is not a dramatic person. She said them the way you say something when you found the exact right language for a thing you've been circling. And I stood in her kitchen and I had nothing to offer in response, because she was completely right. And I knew she was completely right. And the worst part, the part I've carried longest, was that even then, even in that moment, some part of me was calculating. How do I fix this? What do I say? How do I manage this into a version that doesn't end? Still, even then, still reaching for control instead of truth. I'm sorry, I said. She looked at me. I know you are, she said. Go home, Ethan. I went to get my jacket. At the door, she said my name. I turned around. She was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, and she looked not angry, not anymore. Just tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been here before and had hoped, genuinely hoped, that this time it would be different. I need a few days, she said. Okay, I said. And I need you to think, she said. Not about what to say, about why. I nodded. I went home. I sat in my condo, and I thought about why. I didn't come up with an answer that night. It would take longer than a night. It would take losing everything first. She said she needed a few days. I gave her 4, not because 4 felt like the right number. I had no idea what the right number was. I gave her 4 because on the 5th morning I woke up at 5:30 and lay in the dark of my condo staring at the ceiling and thought, I should call her. And then thought, but what do I say? And then thought about that for 2 hours without arriving at an answer, which told me something I wasn't ready to hear yet. The 4 days were not good days. I went to work. I debugged things. I ate meals I don't remember. I sat in my apartment in the evenings with the specific quality of silence that belongs to people who are waiting for something they're not sure they deserve. Mia texted on day 2. She told me what happened. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that was going to land the way it did. I told her it wasn't her fault. It wasn't. On day 4, I texted Claire, can I come over? She responded 40 minutes later. Yes. I drove to her apartment in the early evening. She buzzed me up. She opened the door and she was wearing the oversized university sweatshirt she wore on Sundays, and her hair was down and she looked not devastated. That was the thing I noticed first. She looked tired and clear-eyed and like someone who had spent 4 days thinking carefully and had arrived somewhere. I hadn't arrived anywhere. We sat on opposite ends of her couch. Not staged, just the natural geometry of 2 people who needed to be in the same room without being in the same space yet. She asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. She made it in the kitchen and brought it back, and we held our mugs and she said, I've been thinking about what you said, that you didn't want to complicate things. Heather, I started, wrong name. Claire, I'm sorry, She looked at me. I've been thinking about it, she continued, and I want to understand it, not to let you off the hook, but because I need to know if this is. She stopped. She turned the mug in her hands. I need to know if this is a mistake you made or if this is who you are. It was a mistake, I said. Was it? Yes. Then explain it to me, she said. Not what happened, I understand what happened. Explain why. Explain what was happening in you when I asked that question and you looked at me and chose no. I sat with that. I opened my mouth twice and closed it. I don't want to lose you, I said finally. That's what you were afraid of then, she said. That's not an explanation, that's the fear. What's underneath the fear? I looked at my tea. I stopped. I thought if I told you, you'd see it differently. Me and Mia. And there's nothing there, Claire. There has been nothing there for 7 years and there will never be anything there. But I thought you'd. Doubt it, she said. Yes. So you lied to protect yourself from my doubt. To protect us, I said. To protect what we had. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan, she said. And the way she said my name had something final in it. Not cruel, just finished. The way you say a word when you've located exactly what it means. That's not protecting us. That's protecting you. From the discomfort of watching me have a reaction you couldn't control. I didn't say anything. You decided what I could handle, she said. You decided what information I was allowed to use when I was deciding whether to trust you. And you made that decision without asking me. Because asking me would have required you to sit in uncertainty for a while, and you couldn't do that. She wasn't angry. That was the most devastating thing about the conversation. She wasn't angry. She sounded like someone who had done the analysis and found the answer and was now explaining it calmly to the person who needed to hear it. I know, I said. I don't think I can trust you right now, she said. And I don't think I can be in a relationship where I'm not sure I can trust you. So I think, she stopped. She pressed her lips together. I think we need to take a break, a real one. I need to figure out what I want. And you need to, she looked at me. You need to do some actual thinking, not about me, about yourself. I nodded. I sat there and I nodded, and I felt the conversation ending, and I felt the relationship ending inside the conversation, and I sat with both of those feelings, and I did not fight. I want you to notice that. I did not fight. She wasn't telling me it was over. She was telling me she needed space and time to figure out what she wanted, which is, there was room in that. There was still room. And I sat on her couch holding a mug of tea that was going cold, and I looked at the woman I wanted to marry, and I let the room close around us, and I said, okay, just that, okay. I put the mug on the coffee table. I got my jacket, I said. I'm sorry, Claire, I mean that. She nodded. I know you do, she said. I drove home in the rain. I didn't call Mia. I didn't call my brother. I sat in my apartment and I watched the rain on the window and I thought about how, in the decisive moment, the one where something might still have been possible, I had done the thing I always did. I had made myself small. I had taken up less space than the situation required. I had let the door close because opening it would have meant saying, I'm not ready to lose you. I made a mistake. Tell me what you need, and I will do it. Saying that would have meant being visible in a way I didn't know how to be. So I said okay instead, and I went home. She called on Thursday. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to talk to her. I'd been waiting for the call with the specific anxiety of someone who knows a verdict is coming. But because I'd built a careful equilibrium over 4 days of silence and answering would break it. I answered. I need to say something else, she said. No greeting. Her voice was different than it had been on the couch, not calm anymore. Something more alive. Anger that had found its form. Okay, I said. I've been sitting with this for 4 days, she said. And I keep coming back to the same thing, and I need to say it to you directly because I think you need to hear it. I'm listening. You didn't even try. I waited. At my apartment, she said. Tuesday night. I told you I needed a few days and you said okay and you left. And I've been... I could hear her moving, pacing maybe, the particular sound of someone who cannot be still while they're saying something important. I've been angry about the lie, that's real. But I am angrier about what happened after, because the lie I can understand. It was wrong and it was cowardly and it was wrong, but I can understand the fear that produced it. Claire, I am talking, she said, not harsh, just clear. I stopped. What I cannot understand, she said, is that you sat in my apartment while the relationship was ending and you did nothing. You made no argument. You offered no real explanation. You just folded. You said okay and got your jacket and walked out the door. And I have been trying to figure out if that means you didn't care enough to fight or if it means something else. She stopped. Which is it? She said. I care, I said. Then why didn't you fight? The question sat between us in the silence. I opened my mouth. I closed it. Ethan, her voice had changed again. Lower now. The anger still there, but something underneath it. Not softness exactly, more like the thing under anger when the anger is coming from loss. I have been lied to before, by men who were very good at it. And when I found out, every single one of them fought. They made their case. They explained and rationalized and pushed back and told me I was overreacting. She paused. And I spent years learning that fighting doesn't mean caring. That someone arguing for themselves doesn't mean they deserve to be believed. Yes, I said. So when you didn't fight, she said, I thought maybe he's different. Maybe he's actually sitting with what he did. Maybe the silence is respect. She stopped. And then I thought, or maybe he's already gone. Maybe he checked out the moment things got difficult, which is exactly what someone does when they've never actually learned to stay. I was sitting on my kitchen floor. I don't know when I'd sat down on the floor, but I was there, back against the cabinet, phone pressed against my ear, and the truth of what she was saying was arriving in pieces. Tell me which one it is, she said. I don't know, I said. A silence. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a while, she said. I know. Figure it out, she said. Not for me, for yourself, because whether or not she stopped. She started again. Whatever happens with us, Ethan, you cannot keep doing this. You cannot keep leaving every room that gets uncomfortable. At some point, you run out of rooms. She hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. The rain was doing what it does. I thought about every relationship I'd been in and the specific pattern of how they'd ended, not with dramatic confrontations or irreconcilable differences, but with a gradual withdrawal on my part, a slow reduction of presence until there was so little of me left in the room that the ending felt inevitable and almost mutual. I thought about how I'd gotten so good at leaving that I'd started doing it before I was asked. I thought about where I'd learned it. My parents had a peaceful marriage. I want to say that first, because it's true, and because the story I'm about to tell is not a story about bad parents or a damaged childhood in any dramatic sense. My parents were decent people who loved each other and loved my brother and me in the ways they knew how. The peace in our house, though, the peace had a cost. My father was a man who did not do conflict, not because he was passive or weak, he was neither, but because somewhere in his own history, he developed the belief that keeping the temperature down was the primary job of a person in a family. That the measure of a good husband, a good father, was the absence of friction. He was the great reducer of friction. He could de-escalate anything. He could find the angle from which every disagreement became unnecessary. What this meant in practice was that nothing was ever fully said. My mother had opinions, strong ones. She was smarter than she was given room to be, in the particular way of women of her generation who married young and organized their intelligence around the management of a household. When she was frustrated with my father, with a situation, with anything, she expressed it in the way she'd learned was available to her. Sideways. Indirectly. The comment that was technically about dinner but was actually about something else. My father would redirect, smooth it over, change the subject with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. And I watched. For 18 years, I watched two people who loved each other negotiate the space between them, by never fully naming what was in it. And I learned, not from instruction, never from instruction. Kids don't learn this stuff from what they're told. I learned from observation that honesty was the thing that broke things. That saying the direct true thing created friction and friction created damage and damage was to be avoided at all costs. I learned that the way to keep people was to manage their experience of you. Give them the version that works. File down the edges. Don't show them the things that might make them leave. I was 11 when I lied to my father about a broken window, an accident, baseball, completely innocent, and watched his face when I told him it had happened on its own and saw the relief there. Not because he believed me. I don't know if he believed me, but because the lie gave him the option not to have to deal with it, and he took the option, and the afternoon continued peacefully. And I understood then that this was a transaction we could both accept. I sat in a therapist's office on a Tuesday in January and told her this story. The window, my parents, the specific education in conflict avoidance I'd received over 18 years. And when I was done, she looked at me for a moment and said, "What do you think honesty was going to cost you? When Claire asked you about Mia, I thought she'd doubt the friendship," I said. "See something that wasn't there. And if she did, then she might leave," the therapist said. "Yes. So lying was a way of preventing loss." "Yes. How's that working out?" I looked at her. She didn't say it cruelly. She was a small woman in her 50s named Dr. Osei, who had a habit of asking the most precise question at the most uncomfortable moment, and then sitting with the silence that followed as though it didn't bother her at all. "It's not," I said. "When did you first learn that honesty leads to loss?" She said. I thought about it. Not the window. Before the window. I was 8 years old, and I'd told my mother I was angry about something, some family decision, some plan that had been changed without asking me, and I'd said it directly the way 8-year-olds say things, without the editorial softening I'd later learn. And she'd looked at me with a kind of pained surprise, and the conversation had ended badly, and my father had come to find me afterward and said, in his gentle redirect voice, "Sometimes we keep certain feelings to ourselves, Bud. It goes more smoothly. It goes more smoothly." I'd spent 27 years optimizing for smoothly. "I was 8, I said. Dr. Osei nodded. "What did you learn at 8? She said. "That honesty makes things worse," I said. "And what have you paid for that lesson?" I thought about Claire on the couch, the mug going cold, the word okay. "Everything," I said. She wrote something down. "Here's what I want you to consider," she said. "The lie you told Claire it wasn't really about Mia. You know that." "Yes." "It was about control, about managing her response. Making sure you didn't have to sit in the discomfort of watching someone you love form an opinion you couldn't predict. Yes, and when she gave you an opening, when she said she needed time, which is not the same as it's over, you left. Immediately, without fighting. Yes. Why? I looked at the window behind her. Seattle in January does a specific kind of gray that is less a color than an absence of color. Because if I'd fought, I said slowly, and she'd still said no, I couldn't have managed that. A fight I could lose felt worse than just leaving before the result. So you withdrew to protect yourself from a loss you hadn't been given yet. Yes, she let that sit. Ethan, she said, what if lying isn't who you are? What if it's just how you learn to survive? I looked at her. Those are not the same thing, she said. One is identity, the other is a strategy, and strategies can be changed. I sat with that for the rest of the session, and on the drive home, in the gray January rain, I thought about the difference between who you are and what you learned to do to stay safe in rooms that didn't feel safe. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't dread. It wasn't hope exactly. It was smaller than hope. It was the first suggestion of a door. I went back to Dr. Osai every Tuesday. Not because it was easy. It wasn't easy. The first month especially had a quality I can only describe as sustained discomfort. The particular feeling of examining things you've spent years arranging carefully, so they didn't need to be examined. She had a way of locating the precise thing I'd rather not discuss, and then waiting, very patiently, for me to discuss it. I started noticing the pattern in real time. A work meeting where I agreed with a decision I thought was wrong. A phone call with my brother where he said something dismissive, and I changed the subject. The specific sequence, discomfort arrives, self checks out, something smooth and avoidant comes out of my mouth instead. I'd been running that sequence so automatically I'd stopped noticing it was a choice. It was a choice. That was the part I had to sit with. Every accommodation, every redirect, every moment of telling someone what they wanted to hear instead of what was true, those were choices. I'd told myself they were reflexes, instincts, just the way I was built. But they were choices I'd made so many times they'd worn grooves. And grooves can be walked out of. I called my mother in February, not to confront her about anything. I want to be clear about that. But because Dr. Ose had suggested that some of the work of understanding yourself is having the conversations you've been avoiding. And my mother and I had been having careful, surface-level conversations for approximately 30 years. I told her about the situation with Claire, the real version, the lie and what it had meant, and what Claire had said, and what I'd been understanding about myself since. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father was the same way." I didn't say anything. "He never wanted conflict," she said. "He thought he was protecting everyone. I think he thought that keeping things smooth was a form of love." She paused. "I spent a lot of years being frustrated that he never just said the thing, that I could never quite get to the real conversation." She stopped again. "I didn't know he'd pass that down. He didn't teach it on purpose," I said. "No," she said. "They never do." We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, possibly ever, and it was uncomfortable and necessary. And by the end of it, I felt the particular tiredness that comes from doing something difficult and not flinching. She said, before we hung up, "She sounds like she was worth fighting for." "She was," I said. "Past tense," she said. "I don't know yet," I said. After we hung up, I sat with the not knowing, which is something I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, to do without immediately reaching for a way to resolve it. The Tuesday they'd agreed on for me, to collect my things from Claire's apartment, arrived at the end of February. Some items I'd accumulated over 8 months. A book, a charging cable, a sweater I'd left after a Sunday, the small, ordinary debris of a relationship embedded in a space. I stood in my apartment the night before and thought about what I was going to say, not to manage the outcome, not to make it go a certain way, just what was true, what I actually wanted her to know. What I would say if I had stopped trying to control what happened after I said it. The answer was simpler than I expected. I drove to her apartment the next morning in the February rain. She buzzed me up. The door opened, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I walked into a difficult room without already planning my exit. She looked the same. Of course she looked the same. It had been 3 months, not 3 years, and people don't change their faces because a relationship ends. But I'd been so deep inside my own reconstruction that seeing her at the door felt like something I hadn't fully prepared for. The ordinary specific fact of her, the way she held the door open with one hand and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not warm, not cold, somewhere in the careful middle of someone who has also been doing work and doesn't want to undo it by reacting too quickly. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. She stepped back to let me in. The apartment was the same. The dog-eared stack of veterinary journals on the side table. The plant on the windowsill she'd had since before I knew her, which she talked to occasionally and refused to be embarrassed about. The smell of coffee and something faintly citrus. My things were already in a box by the door. She'd gathered them. The book, the cable, the sweater. A mug I'd bought for her apartment because the one she had was too small for the way I liked my coffee, which she'd kept even after. That was in there too. I looked at the mug in the box and thought about the Sunday morning she'd laughed at me for caring about mug size. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said. "It was easier." She went to the kitchen. The automatic hospitality of someone raised to offer something when a person comes into their home, even when the person is the complication. "Coffee," she said. "Please." She made 2 cups. She brought them to the living room and we sat her on the chair this time, me on the couch, the geography rearranged from the last time we'd been here. More distance, more deliberate. She held her mug. I held mine. "How are you?" she said. "Honestly, that would be a nice change," she said. Not cruelly, just directly. "I've been going to therapy," I said. "Every Tuesday, I've been..." I stopped. I was aware of the impulse to summarize, to package what I'd been doing into something that sounded like progress and progress sounded like argument. I caught it. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did. Not to explain it to you, just to understand it myself." She nodded slowly. "And," she said, "and I think I've been running from difficult things my entire life," I said. Lying was just the version of running that let me stay in the room. I could be there, present, technically, while still keeping the thing that might get me hurt at a safe distance. I looked at my coffee. "I thought I was protecting us. I've had to spend 3 months understanding that I was protecting me. From your reaction, from your doubt, from the possibility that the truth might cost me something I wanted." She was listening, not visibly responding, just listening, which is a thing Claire does with her whole attention in a way I'd never fully appreciated until I didn't have it directed at me anymore. "I stole your choice," I said. "That's what you said and you were right, and I want you to know I understand it now, not as a thing I did wrong. I understand what it means. You were building something with me, using the information you had, and I made sure the information was incomplete. I edited the version of myself you were allowed to decide about." I stopped. "That's not something that can be explained away, I know that. I'm not here to explain it away." She looked at her coffee. "What are you here for?" she said, quietly, not a challenge, a genuine question. "To say what I should have said in November," I said. "Not to get anything back, just because it needed to be said, and I'm trying to learn to say the necessary things even when I can't control what happens after." She waited. "I love you," I said. "That's first. I love you in a way I haven't loved anyone, and I was so afraid of losing it that I started protecting it in the worst possible way by not being honest in it." I paused. "And I am sorry, not for what it cost me, for what I took from you. The ability to choose me knowing the whole truth. That was yours and I took it because I was scared, and I'm sorry." The room was very quiet. Outside, February rain on the window. Claire sat with what I'd said for a long moment. I watched her, and I didn't try to read her face for an answer. That was new. That was something I'd been practicing, sitting with someone else's processing without trying to manage it toward the outcome I wanted. "I believe you," she said finally. "Okay," I said. "That doesn't mean..." She stopped. "I want to be honest with you too, since we're doing that." "Please," I said. "I've missed you," she said. "That's real. These 3 months have been, there were things we had that I haven't stopped thinking about. The ordinary things especially. The way we were on Sundays. The way you'd laugh at something I said slightly after the fact, like you needed to process it first." She looked at the window. "I've missed that version of us." "But," I said. She looked back at me. "But I've been lied to before," she said. "By men who were very sorry afterward. And the sorry was always real. I believed the sorry every time. And it still happened again." She pressed her lips together. "I don't know if you're different. I believe that you're trying. I believe that what you're doing in therapy is real. But I can't know yet if it changes the pattern. And I can't rebuild something on can't know yet." I nodded. That's fair, I said. It's not about fair, she said. It's about… She stopped. She looked at me with something open in her face, something that wasn't quite grief but was in the same neighborhood. I need to know that if I let you back in, I'm letting in the whole person, not the managed version, not the version you've decided is safe to show me. She shook her head slightly. And I can't know that yet. You can't know that yet. No, I said, I can't. We sat with that. The honesty of it. The absence of negotiation. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. She turned her mug in her hands. If you could go back, she said, to that night on the couch, me asking that question. She looked at me. Would you tell me? The question landed the way she'd intended it to. Not as a test. As a door she was opening very slightly to see what was on the other side. I'd thought about this. In the abstract, I'd turned this question over 100 times in the last 3 months. And the answer I always arrived at felt true, but also felt like the right answer. And those two things have a complicated relationship for someone with my history. So I'd had to sit with it long enough to be sure I was arriving at it honestly and not performing it. I looked at her. Yes, I said. I'd tell you the truth, even if I thought it might make you see things differently, even if I thought it might cost me something. I paused. Not because it would be easy. It wouldn't have been, I'd have been terrified. But because you deserve to have the real information. And because love that's built on a managed version of me isn't really love. It's a performance with someone watching. I stopped. I'd have been scared, and I'd have told you anyway. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved in her face. Not resolution, not a decision. Something smaller and more honest than either of those. She nodded, very slightly. Okay, she said. She stood up. She walked to the box by the door and she took out the mug, the oversized one, the one I'd brought for myself, and she looked at it for a moment. Then she put it back on the kitchen counter, where it had been for 8 months, in the spot it had gradually come to occupy. She didn't say anything about it. She came back to the living room. I need more time, she said. I know, I said. I'm not saying yes to anything, she said. I know, I said. She stopped. I'm not ready to close the door. That's all I know right now. I picked up the box. That's enough, I said. That's more than I had when I walked in. She walked me to the door. I stepped into the hallway with the box. I turned around. She was standing in her doorway in the university sweatshirt. And for a moment, we just looked at each other. The full weight of everything that had happened between the coffee shop in March and this hallway in February sitting in the space between us. Take care of yourself, Ethan, she said. You too, I said. The door closed. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I stood there and I didn't try to calculate what had just happened, or what it meant, or what the odds were, or what I should do next. I stood there and I let it be uncertain. And for the first time in my life, the uncertainty didn't send me running. I kept going to Dr. Osei on Tuesdays. I kept doing the work, not because I believed it was going to get me Claire back, and not because I was collecting evidence of my own growth to present to her at some future moment. I kept doing it because I was a different person in those rooms than I'd been 6 months earlier, and the difference felt like something worth continuing toward. I told the truth at work in March. About a project estimate I'd been softening for 3 months because the real number was uncomfortable. My manager wasn't pleased. The conversation was difficult. Nothing collapsed. I told my brother in April about the relationship, the real version, including the parts where I was the one who had failed. He listened without saying much. Then he said, I always wondered when this was going to catch up with you. He meant it with love. I received it that way. I called my mother on her birthday in May and asked her how she was actually asked, and actually listened to the actual answer, which was complicated and real and nothing like the comfortable surface version she usually offered. She sounded surprised. Then she sounded relieved. The summer passed. I dated someone briefly in July. A woman named Renata I met through a friend, kind and funny, and completely deserving of someone who was further along than I was. I was honest with her from the beginning in the ways I was learning to be honest. When it didn't feel right, I said so, directly, instead of withdrawing gradually until she got the message. She appreciated the directness even if she was disappointed by what it meant. I was getting better at staying in difficult rooms. Not good better, there's a difference. September. My brother's birthday dinner. My parents both there, the 4 of us around a table that had hosted 1,000 versions of our family, the comfortable, avoidant version, and now this one, which was still learning what it was. My father said something over dessert, directed at me. A gentle deflection of a topic I'd raised, the reflex, the redirect, the smooth it over. Years ago, I'd have followed his lead, let the moment pass, accepted the silence he was offering. I looked at him. "Dad," I said, "I want to actually talk about this." He looked at me. My mother was very still. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Okay." It wasn't dramatic. It didn't resolve decades of careful avoidance over one dinner. But the door stayed open. And my father, to his credit, walked through it. I drove home afterward and thought, this is what it feels like to stop running. Not the arrival, just the stopping, just the turning around and facing whatever's behind you and saying, I'm done outpacing this. It doesn't feel heroic. It just feels like being present in your own life, which turns out to be harder and more valuable than anything I'd spent 35 years reaching for instead. October. I was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, the one near Capitol Hill that runs through October. The stalls lined up along the closed street, the particular smell of cut flowers and roasted coffee, and the end of the growing season. I had a bag of apples, and I was trying to decide between two kinds of honey when I heard her laugh. I knew the laugh before I found her face. She was 2 stalls down, talking to the vendor, holding a bunch of dahlias, deep red, the kind she'd always liked. And she was laughing at something the vendor had said with the full attention laugh I'd thought about more times than I'd admit. She looked up. We saw each other at the same moment. The farmer's market continued around us. Someone with a stroller navigated past. The honey vendor said something I didn't register. Claire walked over. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize. A new one, camel-colored, the collar turned up against the October air. She looked well. She looked like someone who had been doing her own work and had arrived somewhere that suited her. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. We stood there. You look good, she said. So do you, I said. The dahlias are. I know, she said. I saw them and just, she looked down at them. Smiled. The particular smile of someone who has allowed themselves a small, uncomplicated pleasure. We fell into step alongside each other. The way people do when they're both heading the same direction, and the alternative, the deliberate turning away, would be its own kind of statement. How have you been? She said. Honest answer. She looked at me sideways. Is there another kind with you anymore? Working on it, I said. I've been better, differently. I've been learning to stay in things instead of leaving them before they can leave me. She was quiet for a moment. Therapy, she said. Still going, every Tuesday. She nodded. I started too, she said. After. Not because of you specifically, or not only. Just I realized I had my own patterns to look at. Things I kept choosing. Yeah, I said. We walked past the flower stalls, and the cheese stall, and the bread vendor with the perpetual line. I think about our conversation, she said. In February, what you said. Which part? I said. That you'd have told me, she said. Even if it cost you something. I looked at the middle distance. I meant it, I said. I know, she said. That was the thing, I believed you. She paused. I've been sitting with that for 8 months, what it means to believe something and still not know what to do with it. We had reached the end of the market, where the stalls gave way to the normal street, and the normal Saturday resumed its ordinary motion around us. We stopped. The October light was doing the thing it does, low and amber. The particular quality of autumn in the Pacific Northwest that makes everything look like the last good version of itself before the gray closes in. She looked at me. You seem different, she said. I finally stopped trying to control whether people stay, I said. She held the dahlias with both hands. She looked at me for a long moment, not searching, not calculating, just seeing. The way she'd always been able to see me, which was the thing I'd spent our entire relationship trying to manage and had failed to manage and had finally, slowly, stopped trying to. I don't know what happens next, she said. I felt the old impulse, the reach for reassurance, the move toward a managed answer, the version of this that ended with something resolved and certain and safe. I let it pass. Neither do I said. She smiled, just slightly, something in it that I didn't try to read. She turned toward the parking lot. Then she paused and turned back. Walk with me a little, she said. Yes, I said. No calculation, no exit plan, just yes. We walked toward the parking lot in the October light, side by side, not holding hands, not making promises, not trying to locate a map of what came next in the expression on each other's faces. Just walking, two people standing in the uncertainty that honesty requires. For the first time in my life, I told the truth without trying to manage what happened after. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.